Ashlee, thanks so much for speaking with me today and joining the podcast. You've worked in the anti-violence space for more than 20 years. Tell us about your pathway to education and advocacy and the work you now do.
The pathway wasn't a path I really chose. I was kind of just one day pushed up in front of a microphone, and I started speaking about my own story. So that was like 28 years ago or something like that, like quite a long time ago. And it was when I first started at Mudgingul Aboriginal Women's Centre in Redfern as the bookkeeper. I was the bookkeeper. And I came into this space, and I was in a domestic violence relationship myself with 2 young children. But I didn't think that my situation was that bad. And it wasn't until I worked in this environment that I thought, that's what, I could start identifying that what the relationship I was in wasn't the best. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't good. Still took me many years after that, first inclination to leave and whatnot. But there was this event, and my CEO at the time said, can you just get up and say a few words about, what you're going through? And I just started, like it just come out of me. And then I thought, oh, my God. So that was kind of the beginning of it, of like being able to identify what domestic violence was. Because growing up, and I'm going to be very frank and honest here, it wasn't unusual to see violence in the community that I grew up in Kempsey, like at football matches or even in downtown. Like it was not. I don't want to say normal because it wasn't normal, but it wasn't something that I hadn't seen before. Yeah. If that makes sense. So I guess my answer to your long answer around your question, my advocacy started with my own healing.
Yeah. And what are some of the ways that you work with, victim survivors of violence now?
Well, now it's more me speaking and doing educational stuff. I've written my own book, which is going to be I self-published it 5 years ago, and now Megabala Books are going to publish it. I've picked it up and want to republish it. So that's going to go out in like all over Australia, whereas when I self-published it was like really only people I knew or who followed me on social media or whatnot. So it started with that. The beginning of it was actually using rugby league as a vehicle to get the anti-violence message out. So I did a lot of work with Tackling Violence, which is a country rugby league initiative, again using rugby league as a vehicle to get the anti-violence message out. And I wrote the NRLs, the first training package for the NRL's Voice Against Violence. So mine started in that training space. And then what that's led to is me writing my book, developing training myself, and speaking on the subject, like becoming a somewhat expert. I don't think anyone's an expert on anything except their own life. So my expertise in this is on my own lived experience, and I always come from there. And the reality is, I see myself in a lot of young women, and so I think that's my thing is get in young, so before you get into a DV relationship, because right now everything that's put in place is after the fact.
Yeah.
Prevention's got to be number one as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. You're incredibly open about your personal experience with violence, having survived an abusive relationship with your children's father and then navigating your son breaching an AVO against his own partner. Where do you find the strength or the boobs within the context of this series, I guess, to persevere and drive to change systems that are broken?
Well, I say it with my chest, with my titties, with my boobs, whatever you want to call it. Because I am so clear on where my line is drawn, and that's the issue with the majority of people, and that's why violence is so prevalent in today's society. Because my line is clear. I've got zero tolerance, and I show that by supporting my son's ex-partner. I supported her. He's my son. but I am not going to say, oh, well, because that's my son, I'm going to move the line of where I stand. No, my line is drawn, and it's drawn deeply and firmly, and I will not move it for anyone, not even my own child. And I think that is the issue in this space, is that until it happens to you, or someone that's involved in domestic violence, everyone will say, oh, I've got zero tolerance to violence, until they have to deal with it. And then that line moves, that line in the sand moves. And we can't do that. We have to stand staunch, and it has to start with us, because I believe that every single person has the capacity to draw that line in the sand and to make their homes, their communities, their towns and suburbs as safe as they want it. And it begins with us and what our tolerance to violence is. And I have a zero tolerance.
Yeah. And not to have any kind of exceptions around that rule.
No exceptions.
Is there a social or cultural expectation, do you believe, on Aboriginal women to be stronger and more resilient than others, particularly in the context of domestic and family violence?
It's not a cultural expectation at all. It's societal. Because, when you go back into the history of Aboriginal women in this country, this country was born on the bodies, the violence, the deception against Aboriginal women. We talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, coercive control now. These were all things Aboriginal women were going through during colonisation. Yeah, I say this often, that at the beginning, then Aboriginal women that were having fair-skinned babies, that wasn't a Disney romantic movie like Pocahontas. That was rape. That was violence. That was women having children to men that they didn't even know because of that violence. So it's not that it's a cultural thing. It's a thing we've been so subjected to such high levels of violence since colonisation, which is only 200 odd years ago. And that tolerance has shifted down over the years because of the systems in place that have been extremely violent and racist towards Aboriginal women.
Yeah. I guess with that in mind, Aboriginal women are 34 times more likely to become victims of violence than white women. Why are we so complacent to something so horrifying? How do we address this?
Well, we start telling the truth about the beginning of Australia. That it's a racist system. If Aboriginal woman goes to a hospital, she doesn't get treated the same as a non-Aboriginal woman that's been through domestic violence. If police are called to an Aboriginal woman's house when there's domestic violence, she's not treated the same. And that was prevalent in that TV series, Look What She Made Me Do, that was narrated by
Jess Hill.
When an Aboriginal woman was standing there dripping in blood with a sheet around her, telling the police that the person that just violently assaulted her was going to harm her child. Her father was there. He's going to harm my grandson. What did the police do? They threw her in the back of a bull wagon and took her to the police station. What happened? Her son was murdered. What more proof do we need that the systems are failing Aboriginal women than that was blatantly put on TV? How many other stories are like that people don't know about? That's the issue with domestic violence in this country. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're black, white or brindle. It doesn't matter how rich you are or what God you worship. It happens in every single town, city in Australia, in the world. But in Australia, for Aboriginal women, who are less than 2% of the population and sit in the highest percentage of all things violence, it's not only violence perpetrated by men and other women, it's systemic violence, it's systems, it's organisations in place that are violent and racist towards Aboriginal women because they don't treat Aboriginal women equal in this country to any other nationality woman in this country. And that is the truth.